Hi there, thanks for stopping by. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use our mini Couronne sticks to create Couronne rings. So let's get started. What is a Couronne ring, I hear you ask? It is basically a little blanket stitched ring that stands alone from any other embroidery that you're working on. So these were used in like white work. The sticks themselves are sometimes called hedibo sticks or hedibo. I'm not sure on the pronunciation, so I apologize in advance. And basically they could be added to the work to add a little bit of extra on a lot of other different types of lace. They're worked over sticks that are traditionally graduated, usually much larger than these. So these little ones are so that you can get nice little holes. And why? Well, you've got quite a lot of options. You can make a lacy creation using almost just those. I've added in a few French knots, but as you can see, you can bend them and manipulate them, and it's great for your slow stitching. You can also use the sticks as picot gauges, so when you're creating scalloped edges, of course this one has got using each of the graduated sizes, but you can see what I mean, that you can actually get even and consistent picots all the way around. And of course, being so small, you can also make birdseye buttons, so Dorset birdseye buttons. So let's show you how to make them. Thread your chosen thread onto a tapestry needle, and then basically decide which of the stepped areas you want to use. So each of the areas refer to a different size hole when you've completed. So this one is on the third, and so that's that sort of hole. But you can obviously go much smaller if you wish. It all depends on where you place your thread. You can wrap in whichever direction you wish. Try to work out how you're going to do the stitches. You may find one way is more comfortable than another. And basically just hold your thread alongside the side that you're chosen and wrap it around. You can wrap around as many times as you wish. That will either give you a thicker or a wider ring, depending on how you wrap. I find it's quite nice to wrap and to try to get the wraps sort of on top of each other a little bit, because that gives you a nice rounded shape. Don't wrap too tightly. You need to be able to get your needle underneath those wraps, and you're going to fill them up with thread as well each time you work the stitching over the top of it, so it will start to get tighter. Sometimes you'll find you need to remove the ring to finish the last of the stitches if you've wrapped too tightly. Then all that you need to do is work blanket stitches over these threads. Now you can decide to have the stitches all along the top edge, or you can pull them to the center. Much of it depends on the look that you want to achieve afterwards, but you can manipulate often your finished piece anyways. So it's a good idea to start out by working against the stick, because that will keep everything nice and even. You don't need to pull your stitches too tight. Just try to make sure that the knot of the blanket stitch is nice and even along the top edge. or the bottom edge or the center, wherever you're putting it. So I'll carry on and fill this up. When you've worked your last stitch, it's a good idea to take your needle under the ridge from the first stitch. This will just lock the stitches in place and stop them from twisting. Then you can gently slide the ring from the stick. Now, because I've worked the Couronne, the knot on the stitch at the top of the Couronne, you can see it's like a little sort of crown shape in that it's got a top edge, and you can of course use it that way. However, you can, if your stitches aren't too tight, you can sort of twist them out so that your knot lies on the outer edge. If you work tightly, that can be a little bit difficult. So I'm going to show you a second method. To finish off, just go through and thread through on whatever side that you've decided is the wrong side of your Couronne. And then you can just trim that away. So that's the first way of working. The second way of working is really the same. However, there's a little difference. I'm wrapping around, and then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go under all of the threads. So I've still wrapped so that I can go under the threads. And I'm going to wrap around these central threads just loosely, okay, just to hold them all together. This can help you get a more rounded appearance as well. I'm going to go around, catch in that end. And now I'll snip the end so it's not too much in my way. And then at this point, when I know that all of the threads are sort of surrounded by a wrapped thread, I can then slide off and work my blanket stitches over the ring, but holding the ring. Okay, so some people prefer the other way, some people like this way, because when you're working this way, you can make sure that you're lining up the ridge right at the edge of your ring. So it's whichever way works best for you and what you want to actually achieve. You can also do them a little bit tighter when you've taken it off. And so, as before, take the first stitch, the last stitch through the first stitch, just to lock it. Saves you having a bit of a gap on the edge. Decide which is your sort of wrong side. I've got a little bit of a tail of thread there, so that probably should be my wrong side. And then just thread through as before, just to secure that end, because these will be stitched down, so you don't really have to worry about knots or anything like that. and another little Couronne ring. The other thing that you can do is if you find that you're wrapping very tightly all of the time, you can wrap around one side and then slide it to the next one to do your actual stitching. And so you've got the best of both worlds. You start out the stitching, the covering stitches on the one, then move up to the next as it gets tighter, because as I said, you're adding the thread each time. That's shrinking the center hole just a little bit. So it's a little bit of practice to make sure that you get it right. Making a bird's eye button. Now bird's eye buttons, you can make them with just thread, but they do need to have enough thread so that they don't collapse in on themselves. And ideally, they should use a very, very small or almost non-existent hole. Historically, it's quite rare to see them with a large hole, and if they do have a slightly larger hole, they do tend to have a little spider's web filling that hole so that it works as a button. So the biggest, most important thing sort of for if you're making them now and you're not worried about the historical is to make sure that they're quite stiff. If they collapse in on themselves, then they're likely to come unbuttoned. I do have a complete video on an older video on making bird's eye buttons. So I will pop the link in the description below, and it shows you a few different ways of doing it. But basically you have a triangle of fabric that's got a nice stretch when it's on that long edge. Having your fabric a little damp really helps. And then I'm going to roll from the top triangle. So the short edge triangle. It takes a little while to get going sometimes, but that's why being damp helps as well. But once it does, you can just roll it along. Try to get it as tight as possible. And then I like to keep rolling a little bit just to give me a nice shape that doesn't want to come unrolled. And then roll this around your stick. Just come undone a little bit. It's dried off a little bit. Just going to dampen that a little bit more. Oops, sorry for the noise. I just hit my little pin dish. Okay, so rolled round. Few extra threads that have pulled out, so I'll just get rid of those. And then take your needle as before, thread it up with your thread, and wrap around. So there's the fabric with thread wrapped around it to hold it in place. Now I like to remove my fabric from the stick and then sort of flatten it down before I start the next step, which is the stitches. So as before, I'm going to work blanket stitches. But what you need to do is try to have the ridge along the bottom. So you see how thick this is, you want them along the bottom edge of your button, or of the fabric ring. And you want to try to make sure that they're all nice and neat and side by side. And so, one bird's eye button. I actually think the hole is a little bit too large myself. Oh, and do as before, last stitch through first stitch to lock. I do actually think the hole is still a little bit too large for my liking. As I said, I have seen some historical ones with larger holes. How you can tell a button from a Couronne ring is usually the dimension of it. This is not really moving easily, whereas this can be manipulated and squished about. So, as I said, I think that's a little bit of a too large a hole, so I'm going to show you how to work the little spider's web over the top. So I'll come back up through the ridge, and then go straight across, and then go down through the ridge. So we don't want to mess up the side of the ridge. And then I'm going to come up again. Let's see, I want to be right about there, I think. Up through the ridge, across, and down. You can do just 4, but I'm going to do 6. And then straight across again. And then I'm going to come up. I'm going to do a little cross stitch. And then pull this in somewhat, okay? These often have the stitches pulled down a fair bit. And then I'm going to work rounding back stitches just as I would for a regular Dorset button. So again, I'll put the link below to a Dorset button if you're totally new to this. And really you only do a few rows. If you're using a very fine thread, as you would if you're doing something historic, you know, something for costume, for a shirt or something, then you want to use a very fine white linen. But of course, when we're having fun and doing slow stitching and just making nice little embellishments for our work, we can do whatever we want. I think I'll do 2 rows. And then I'm just going to finish off at the back again by weaving through. Weave through a few times because this is a button. This design of a bird's eye is usually, not always, often, perhaps is a better term, referred to as a mite. So the ones with the little wheel inside are often referred to as a mite. But as you can see, that's a nice substantial button. It's soft, So made with the right materials, could be washed, and I've got a little bit of a gap there, so if you have a gap you can often move your threads about as well. And it sits flat with the ridge on the bottom. So thanks very much for watching. Do please click like, hit subscribe, and all the other fun stuff, as that really helps the channel. And until the next time, take care of yourselves. Bye bye for now.